Okay, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. I will keep an eye on the waiting room and continue to let folks in. I am Megan Plott with Historic Columbia. It's great to be with you all for the third edition of our virtual behind the scenes tour. We are on Main Street tonight, and we've got Chandler Yonkers behind the camera and John Scherer leading the tour. Just a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to ask questions through the chat function. So please send me any questions and I will filter those through to the folks who are on site. And if you need anything, just message me through the chat. Chandler, are y'all ready for me to toss it to you?
I believe so.
Good evening. This is John Scherer back for another installment of our behind the scenes tour. This evening, we are very, very pleased to be in the 1600 block of Main Street again. Perhaps some of y'all have known that as a destination for great food and drink and whatnot. Well, it's just going to get better because in the coming months, we're going to enjoy another addition to Main Street's allure, and that is going to be smoked. We're going to talk a little bit about the future, the present, and the past of an important and very interesting destination here from 1639 to 1645 Main Street. Give you a little bit of history. We're also going to introduce you to all of the principal players in transforming this property from a historic structure into one that is nonetheless historic, but it is equipped for modern day contemporary convenience. So we'll get a chance to hash out a little bit about the background of the property, but also the process behind the transformation. So really happy to have Chandler here again with us tonight. He's going to make sure that you have a tremendous amount of eye candy to look at. This building is full of great colors and textures and kind of question marks in some respects, just like any historic structure would be. So we're going to try to demystify both the process and talk a little bit about the buildings themselves. Follow me.
While John's walking in, I'm just going to ask again that if you are home tonight, we ask that you put yourselves on mute.
Staring through the window.
Oh, this is not good. If they come, this is what they're looking at right now. If they come this way, they're gonna see us all like.
Hey Meg, you are not on mute.
Are they coming in?
So for those of you who are just joining us, if you would make sure that you have your Zoom muted. We will give you the opportunity to unmute that later and ask questions. We encourage questions. We hope that you'll have some engagement with us this evening as we go through this historic property. So for those of you just joining us, again, we're at 1639, 1645 Main Street, multiple addresses in really two different buildings. I'm going to ask Chandler just to kind of pan the facade of this structure. You're going to see two very different looking appearances. Over here off to the south at the left-hand side, we have kind of this green and yellow painted building. And then off to the right-hand side, bereft of any kind of paint, is of course this red brick building. You're looking at 1639, 1643 to the south, and 1645, what historically was 1649. And these buildings, two buildings, multiple addresses, are illustrative of the kind of architecture, type of commercial buildings you would have found on Main Street, in some respect before the Civil War, but certainly after the war, when Main Street, the majority of which had been burned, was physically rebuilding. So what you have is essentially a double pile structure, which means simply two rows or two sections that would be multiple rooms deep, and it is those rooms flank a center staircase that leads up to the second story. First stories were storefronts. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. And then upstairs would have been spaces for residential life, later to be converted into commercial use during the later 19th century, 20th century, so forth. We're going to introduce you to Greg Middleton. He's one of the principals here of Smoked, and talk a little bit about the kind of the process and the idea behind it. Greg, how you doing, John? Love to introduce you, everyone. Folks, this is Greg Middleton. Greg Middleton is one of the owners of the future Smoked, and I'm going to just kind of throw out some questions for you.
Fantastic.
And we'll just kind of see what you think.
What's everybody want to know?
Well, first and foremost, tell us a little bit about yourself and about the concept behind this endeavor.
My name is Greg Middleton. Like John said, thank you. I'm one of the developers, along with my father, Scott Middleton, and my sister, Sarah Middleton, of Smoked. We have done several other buildings on the 1600 block and a couple around Columbia like this. We have the Grand and the main course. Many of you might have known it as Michael's. We're also doing another historic renovation on Taylor Street and a large brewery up on North Main. But this project here is called Smoked. What we will be focusing on is high quality, high-end smoked meats, oysters, which I'm sure John will show you the oyster bar in just a minute. And we will also be having a members only speakeasy in the basement, which everyone seems to be pretty excited about. We chose this building for two reasons. I think one, I mean, it's beautiful. And being able to combine these three buildings, well, I guess you'd consider it two, but three storefronts into one restaurant is something that I think is very cool. And then two, it goes extremely well hand in hand with our other developments that we have on Main Street. It's only 2 doors down from the Grand and right across the street from the main course. So from an economic standpoint, it definitely makes sense.
You've answered every conceivable question I could have thrown at you.
Okay.
Other than perhaps, what is your favorite part thus far in the process, the transformation?
For me, the exciting part comes with working with the tax credits, figuring out the tax credits, wondering what our percentages are going to be. I tend to work more on a finance side, so making sure that the money is there to make the project happen. So for me, that tends to be the exciting part.
Well, and that's a great segue, because we're going to make our way down the facades of the building and introduce someone who can tell us a little bit more about the tax credit process. And we're going to rejoin you a little bit later during the rear of the building. And I look forward to catching up with you then.
Great. I'll see y'all back there. Thanks.
Before we move on, I do want to point out to folks that one of the cool things for me getting into any of the historic structures is the opportunity to kind of get up close and have a real good view of some things that a lot of people just see from a distance. Holding here a cast iron ventilator grate. You'll see these adorning several of Columbia's earlier buildings, many of which, of course, were built right after the Civil War. We're not exactly sure where the original builders would have acquired these. They could have theoretically been cast locally in Columbia. There certainly were foundries here. Don't really know offhand, but hopefully further research will allow us to learn a little bit more. Sometimes you'll see them in curvilinear detail, and sometimes you'll see them in star motif. Sometimes you'll see them kind of in a vine motif like this, and floral motifs, but pretty good and quite a workout as well. All right. We're going to leave 1645 Main and make our way down to 1639. While we do, I'm going to ask Chandler to kind of quickly pan the interior. This is 1643. You're going to get a, I think, good impression as to just how deep and how complex all of this transformation is going to be. As I mentioned outside, we are passing really storefronts, and here's that center staircase that I mentioned that would have provided you access to the second story, which we will get a chance to see a little bit later. Right. Well, Greg was kind enough to already tee up a little bit the historic tax credits aspect of any project like this. So just wanted to introduce both Janie Campbell and Andrew Reichman. We are very fortunate to have both of them here because they're going to tell us a little bit about the process, the research, and how that aspect of tax credits has to play in with the design. So how the architecture, old architecture meets with the new architecture here and what will be smoked. So with that, just introduce yourself, if you would, Janie, a little bit, and then we'll move on to Andrew. Tell us a little bit about who you are and who you represent, and I'll ask a few questions thereafter.
Sure. So despite my Mashburn Construction and Garment Design Group stickers, I'm Janie Campbell. I am a preservation consultant with Rogers Lewis, which is a law firm just up the street here on Main Street. And so our firm kind of really focuses on historic tax credit rehabilitation projects. So multiple projects along Main Street, Hotel Trundle, the Curtis Wright Hangar. So we've done a lot of projects here downtown and also throughout the state. My role as the preservation consultant is to do all of the research, everything that's going to inform the design that then Andrew comes up with. So figuring out who historically was here, when they were here, when any changes to the building occurred. I know at some point tonight you'll see before photos of this building, both historic photographs as well as the before condition back in 2016 when there were slipcover facades on these buildings. So I have to go through city directories, newspapers, Sanborn fire insurance maps, as well as just walking around the building and trying to figure out what changes were made when and how that informs the design for what comes into the future. So with that, I will let Andrew take it from there.
Sure. So my name is Andrew Rogerson. I work with Garment Design Group. And Garment Design Group has been in business for about 17 years. In that time, we've worked on numerous local projects. I think we have the most local tax credit projects than any design firm in the state. So it's something that we've kind of carved a niche out of. And so currently, this is one of 4 tax credit projects we have going on in Columbia. And we've done numerous projects with Mashburn Construction as well as Rogers Lewis. And this is just one more step kind of on the Main Street block. I think this is our 3rd one on the 1600 block of Main Street. So we're really excited to be a part of it. It's an exciting project. And we know we've got a great team here with Janie and Mashburn and the Middletons, obviously, who are very experienced in this type of work. So we're very excited to be part of this team.
Andrew, what's typically involved in interpreting the vision of the client while accommodating the kind of idiosyncrasies of a building?
Yeah, it's always a tough process, but it's very helpful to have a client that understands historic buildings, as the Middletons do. Scott and Greg and Sarah clearly have numerous projects on this block alone that reflect their understanding of historic preservation and their love for it. So it's really something that's irreplaceable. You have this great historic building stock in Columbia, and it's really, it's not only a great feature of Columbia, but it's also sustainable to maintain these buildings rather than tear them down, waste all that embodied energy, and then build it back again, and all the landfill waste that's associated with that. So there's numerous fronts that really it makes a lot of sense to make the best use of the existing building stock that we have. And so it's just a matter of managing the owner's expectations and what they think they can do with the project, working with Janie, obviously, to navigate that process, because it's all about uncovering unique aspects of the building and really showing those off and taking it back to its earlier form.
I think that's a great segue. So back to Janie on interpreting and negotiating, if you would, the standards for historic tax credits. Tell us a little bit about that, what all is involved, who answers to whom, so forth.
Sure. So the Department of the Interior has the National Park Service within it. I work with the National Park Service as well as the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So everything that I research and figure out and put together in a Part 1 application and a Part 2 application, I send to the State Historic Preservation Office. So they review it for 30 days, send it to the National Park Service, and then they review it for 30 days, and we get the okay to move ahead. We get the, hold on, let's reassess this and figure out a more compatible approach to the building for what was historically there. So there are 10 standards. So while that sounds like a lot, try figuring those out on a mid-century modern building or an antebellum structure or anything in between. So they're kind of these guiding lights, but they don't pinpoint exactly what you need to do for each individual building. So that's where sometimes people will say, well, what can I do or what can't I do? Well, when you have great architects, you can figure out lots of different ways that you can then present to your client and figure out what melds their vision with the historic vision. So it is a tap dance, a tightrope walk. It's It's a lot of fun, but it can be very challenging.
Well, Janie, Andrew, thank you very much. We're going to rejoin you in just a moment. And in the interim, I'm going to talk a little bit about the building and its history. If y'all, we'll go ahead and meet y'all in the 1643 in just a moment. So while we get everyone repositioned, tell you a little bit about 1639, 1643 to begin with. This structure was erected by the Erhlich family. Michael Erhlich and his relations were responsible for running a shoe store here in Columbia from 1866 all the way up through the early 1920s. But it wasn't just Erhlich's shoe store that was located on site. There were a host of tenants that circled or cycled rather in and out of the 1639 address. We're going to introduce y'all to one of those a little bit later. But the interesting thing, at least for me, is in this discovery process, Janie touched on some of the history that is, or some of the historical resources that are utilized. I too was able to go through and find out some really interesting things. And what I liked was the discovery that Gustavus Theodore Berg, G.T. Berg, whom you may have encountered if you visited the Woodrow Wilson site, the Museum of Reconstruction. He was a draftsman turned architect who was responsible for designing a lot of buildings, particularly during the Reconstruction period. So not just the Wilson House, but also he worked with the State House. He worked with Ebenezer Lutheran Church. And for those of you who have enjoyed Lula Drake, without Gustavus Theodore Berg, you wouldn't have been able to do that because he designed that building as well, which is just 2 doors down from us. That's the old Seegers building. But here, the Erhlich building was designed by Gustavus Theodore Berg as well. And there's some interesting information about him in some of the historic record. When we go through the structure, much like we have in other spaces, this is a wonderful opportunity to see how these masonry buildings and other buildings were constructed. You see the different layers of what it was like to construct such things. So for instance, the exposed masonry here and the plaster, going back and redoing this to meet Department of Interior standards is going to require them to go back and enclose the brick so you can't see it here. There are some other areas where you will be able to see brick, and that's because historically they were uncovered, they were not treated. But here this would have been finished in a more elegant fashion because it was a store. You'll see too, of course, integrating old construction methodology with new construction with our metal girders in here and metal studs for concrete, which is interplaying with our tongue and groove wide floors. We're actually kind of transporting ourselves right through space into 1643 now. So of course we rejoined, excuse me, Janie and Andrew, but we're also going to introduce you to Brian Johnston. Brian is with Mashburn Construction. I'm going to give a shout out to Mashburn because they have been very, very keen on making sure that we're safe today. From the hard hat to everywhere we walked, they did a great job. Thank you. This is a construction site, but it reads like, I mean, the safest construction site I've ever seen. So thank you for that. That's a big deal. Appreciate that. Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Mashburn and your role in this project.
Yeah, sure. So like John mentioned, my name is Brian Johnston. I'm Vice President of Operations for Mashburn Construction. We are the general contractor for this project, and you know, we are absolutely honored and thrilled to have the opportunity to be a part of another project like this. You know, it's something for us to be able to bring a new project out of the ground, but it's really something special to be able to bring something new back into these structures that have been around, you know, for ages, since the late 1800s, and you know, to come in here and to bring new life and a new vision into these buildings, it's something special. You know, at Mashburn, our vision is to be the builder of better people and the builder of better communities, and you know, this project and projects like this really just fit right into our vision. So being able to work with wonderful people like Historic Columbia, and you know, everything that they do for preservation, City of Columbia, and everything that they've been doing with you know, the design districts, and you know, the Main Street corridor and really kind of bringing Columbia back to its roots. It's an exciting time. And of course, working with great folks like Garvin Design Group and Rogers Lewis. It really takes a team, and you know, the Middletons who you met earlier, you know, they're the visionaries, and without them, projects like these, and we've done several with them, those wouldn't be possible. And so yeah, we're really proud here at Mashburn, and I want to make sure I mention you know, our staff of construction professionals that we have here they're actually the newest residents in 1639 to 1645. Those guys are here daily. This is their new home, and that's David McClanahan, who's our pre-construction manager, who spent a lot of time up front working on this project. Brian Travis, who's our project manager, integral in projects like this. You know, he spends probably 60 hours a week working on this thing. And then our superintendents out here on site, Paul Seidelson, who's our lead superintendent, and Rick Stickles. Those guys are really the ones making it happen. So yeah, I'm just glad to be able to take you folks through and see what we're doing. And it's going to be an exciting time when we get to see this thing done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Brian, we're going to rejoin you in just a moment, but don't go anywhere. We're going to, this is a perfect place, I think, to talk a little bit about history, vision, and construction. So, Janie, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with the roof here?
Sure. So obviously we have a nice gigantic skylight. Garvin Design has done a great job of kind of highlighting this feature while also putting another focal point. Here on the ground, there's going to be a kind of horseshoe shaped bar. But you can see that all the kind of blackened charred boards up there, that is from a fire that took place in about 1920. And I think we'll go back to the front of this building maybe in a few minutes, and you'll get to see some flooring that we uncovered that we did not know was previously there. It dates to the 1921 renovation and reopening of this when it was Erhlich shoe store. And so that fire took place while they were here. And that, again, when you read that in a newspaper article, and all of a sudden you start uncovering these layers, you see, oh wow, that's the exact fire that they were talking about. And so you're able to piece together when certain changes took place based on the physical evidence and also in the documentary evidence.
And there's been so much change that's happened within the building over time. I can't remember, was that skylight open before y'all started work?
It was.
It was.
Yeah, it actually was. Yep.
But you didn't know exactly the extent of the fire.
That's right. Yeah, so they did have ceilings in here when we started, so we couldn't see the full extent. But as Mashburn got in and started uncovering and doing some exploration, they discovered the extent of the damage, and so they've been able to come in and kind of patch it back and make it more usable. And so they're going to actually refurbish that skylight, and so it'll be even nicer finish when it's all said and done.
When JR and I were walking through earlier, he's like, "Oh wow, well, you know, why weren't the members removed and replaced?" And I said, "Well, because they were structurally sound at that point." But that being structurally sound, nonetheless, you have gone in and reinforced it. Tell us a little bit about what's going on here structurally.
Yeah, so you know, looking at it, it may you know, looking at the fern, it may look a little odd on how we've sort of made everything plain out. But you know, when you're dealing with these old structures, you don't want to come in and actually move anything. We don't want to replace any components. We don't want to push anything back out of shape. So what we've actually done is come in, installed a beam system underneath it to support it as it sits in place. And then aesthetically, we just went through and furred it out to, you know, to make everything plain out and look nice once it's covered. So, you know, real important with all of these things on these buildings, you can't just come in and, you know, start moving things around. You have to, the integrity of the building, it's been here for years, and you have to make sure to support that and keep it in place.
So Brian, while we're here, if we could pan real quick, this is something that's interesting to me. And I know just enough about construction to maybe talk with you about it. All right.
Sure.
So where we have our rafters, okay, and in the roof and whatnot, and you have these different width boards, we've got a fair amount of gaps in that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because those were designed to accommodate wood shingles initially?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Okay. And then you see the subsequent decking.
Correct. And so yes, so we've gone on top of it and basically reinforced that.
Gotcha. So that's one of the cool things that we're going to see, particularly upstairs too, where in this building, you're going to see well, for all intents and purposes, 3 centuries worth of construction methods and construction composition. We'll see some Morrison tenon joints up there.
Yeah,
that's
always cool to see that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if y'all have seen any of that yet, but there's a lot of it in this building.
We haven't yet, but we're going to take a look at that upstairs. Also, like to point out too, a lot of people come in and go, what are the holes in the ceiling or the walls for? You can see right here to effect, this was a chimney for what would have been a wood burning stove. So that's where your exhaust pipe would have come out here. And then you've got a good example, just barely hanging on, some of the original pressed metal that would have been the ceiling here. And that, from what I understand, a lot of it's been
All of it that was, so 1643 was all tin ceiling.
Right.
The majority of it was in good shape. Like Janie had mentioned, there was a fire in here. There was some water damage over the years. But what we'll typically do in a space like this, and we did here, is we removed all of it carefully, sent it off site, had everything refinished, refurbished, and reprimed. So it's ready to go. We were able to save a lot of the cornice work and all that. And, you know, we'll reuse typically from front to rear, you know, more of the original in the front. So this, I anticipate this front dining space to be all original pressed tin, all original cornice. And then as we move further, then we'll have a replicated tin toward the back.
Gotcha.
But this will be all tin ceilings. So.
Perfect. Well, why don't we make our way out toward the back? I believe that it's there that you can show us some really fascinating new construction. Looks really different from what we've got going on throughout the rest of the historic structure. And on the outside, you'll tell us a little bit about that, and we're going to uncover. Tell us what's going on here. I think we have just enough daylight. Hopefully.
Yeah. So again, what's interesting about these projects is, you know, when we come into them, we try to take the vision of the client. And, you know, it really takes a lot of out-of-the-box thinking on seeing the value in all these old buildings and, you know, kind of the gem that you had in the rough, but actually taking those and fitting them back inside the box, so to speak. So this is kind of an example of, I'll call it a fusion between, you know, new ideas and amenities and, you know, code compliant construction that ties into and preserves the original building structure. So while we're adding on additional amenities onto the building, you know, it's not at the sacrifice of the existing structure. So, you know, we've got a standalone structure here that'll actually house a nice outdoor event space and serve as amenity for the second floor. So
in construction of the concrete block shaft here, that's
yes,
for an
elevator,
elevator, correct?
That's correct.
So what you see above ground is not all of the structure, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it's down another 4 foot to slab, and then there's another 3 foot below that. It's layers of concrete and other stuff.
So about 7 feet down or so.
Yeah,
y'all's crew came across something pretty.
We did.
Okay.
We did.
Well, I'm going to ask Janie to come join me over here while I hold something. We're going to talk a little bit about an artifact that, thankfully, because of keen eyes, Mashburn was able to save. And initially, we thought it was perhaps an artillery shell because it was encrusted in red clay. All they saw was the finial of this alkaline glazed ceramic vessel. Little research, come to find out that this most likely was made around 1900 in Catawba, South Carolina. All right, it's not a very big piece, and it's not all there. It would have originally had a circular basin on the bottom. You would have filled this up with water, and gravity would have filled the basin up for, well, things chickens. So it's a chicken waterer or a chicken cooler. Janie did some research on how this piece may have come to be here. We'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So again, looking at Sanborn fire insurance maps, they usually have each building labeled in some form or fashion of what it was used for at the time. And so 1639 was labeled as a tinware and crockery store. And so then kind of digging a little further, finding city directories that mentioned at this time, and I think from the mid 1880s to the early 1900s, perhaps, was Friday and Brothers crockery store. And so that lines up perfectly with the date of the artifact and why it would be found right behind and underneath 1639 Main Street. So what at first was kind of puzzling, dig a little deeper, literally and metaphorically, and we found out some really interesting information about this well-preserved artifact.
So a little bit more information about Friday and Son. John and Samuel Friday were brothers. Samuel, interestingly enough, in the 1880 city directory, was listed as working with Kingsland, which was a crockery shop that predated ultimately what would become Friday and Sons. Friday and Sons opens in 1881 and it runs until 1906. And 1906 was when John passed away, and then you had a dissolution of that partnership. John Friday was married to Matilda Erhlich, and you have, of course, the Erhlich connection. The Erhlichs built the structure in which the brothers' store was run, and ultimately, John and Matilda lived upstairs, and we're going to get a chance in just a little while to go upstairs and take a look at what will become, again, residential spaces. But right now, we're going to rejoin Scott in the back of 1645 and talk a little bit more about what's going to be the future of this historic structure.
For me to talk about what this is going to become. So, every time I've been able to get involved in the renovation of a historic building, I always have to look at, well, what does the community need, but also what does the building lend itself to be? And so because the 1600 block is now becoming an entertainment district with restaurants and fun things to do, with the bowling alley and the rooftop bar next door. Now that we have the dance club next door as well as the Players Club and the music venues next door, we started looking at, we really need something that's a little bit more fine dining. And so as my family got together, we started talking about things that we like. And we were looking at, we don't really have a smoked meats place. And so we kind of thought about barbecue, but we really wanted to look at all kinds of meats. And then we all love oysters in our family too. So now it's going to be a smoked meats and oyster bar called Smoked. So this back section back here is actually going to be another bar and lounge area. We found that we've had little lounge areas in all the buildings we've redone, and it's really been a popular space for people to rent out, to have parties and things. These are actually going to be I guess a folding door that comes back here. So this will be able to open all up. There'll be a bar in the back, and everything out here will be a courtyard with grass going all the way back to the church there. We'll have a small bandstand, and then the space right here is going to be covered with louver panels. So we'll be able to open it up for sunlight, but also close it back, if there's rain or if we're having bad weather. So all this is just going to be more seating area. Actually, there's a boiler that's like some kind of boiler room for something that goes with the heating for the smoker out here. And so what we've been able to do is, on top of this steel structure, is we're going to have another patio. So we'll be able to have private seating up there, so people will be able to sit up top and overlook all this courtyard out here.
Scott, I think that's really one of the cool things about all of y'all's projects is they're multifaceted. There's a lot going, a lot of energy. One of the things that struck me about Smoked, just the concept of it, is the wonderful kind of fusion of ideas, but also textures. We were talking a little bit about textures on the inside when we were looking at some of the plaster walls that ultimately will return to kind of that refined look. But back here in this seating area, you're going to leave the brick exposed because historically it was exposed.
Right.
And so in meeting the Department of Interior standards for the rehabilitation of historic structures, you're in step with that. And in doing that, you're creating really two very different looking spaces while staying true to the historic structure.
Exactly. And I think that's what you have to do in all these buildings. You have to really look at what were they used for before. Just like across the street at 1624, we do have one exposed brick wall, and it's all the way in the back of the doctor's office back there. So we can make that happen. But you've got to be true to the space and just start living with that space.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of space, this is just the ground floor. So we might as well go ahead and make our way upstairs, where we're going to rejoin everyone and take a look at what's ultimately going to be living space again.
Exactly. So one of the things that I've kind of desired about the city of Columbia is that we just really haven't had a lot of living space downtown, except for students. We've done a lot of student housing. We've done a lot of kind of young adult housing with some of our projects, but we're really looking now at what about the folks like me? You know, I'm 62 years old and I love living downtown. It's the greatest thing in the world. When you go to other cities, like when you go to Greenville and Charleston, you see so many people living downtown. And Columbia has just traditionally been, this is business and office and lawyers' offices and stuff. So that's what's exciting about this and other projects that we'll have coming on board later that's going to bring housing for people. But in this building, we're actually going to be able to get 2 apartments. One upstairs is well over 2,200 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths. And then the other one will be more of a 1 bedroom and a smaller apartment. But it's really exciting to think that people are going to come down and start living downtown again.
Before we go upstairs, I think it's probably safe to say that there might be some activity happening directly beneath my feet in the coming year or so.
Yeah, so so downstairs we have a small basement. It's about, I think, 900 square feet, and we were trying to decide what to do with it. Actually, most people said, Scott, it's going to cost you way too much money to do something with that space, but I didn't want to lose that space for the public. So we're going to put a speakeasy down there. And so originally it was like, you don't tell people you're doing a speakeasy, but then the word got out and we did. So it will be, actually, it'll be designed like a private club. So we'll have people who have memberships. We do have beer that will be coming right off the tanks that will go down there, but it'll also probably have some high-end bourbons and gins and those kinds of things as well. So another nice place for people just to gather and sit.
A little fun fact was years ago, before this concept was ever conceived, I had the opportunity to go down to that basement and was kind of spelunking around and came up with tons of bones. And that was from, we believe, probably when it was the Piggly Wiggly. So we had.
So they were slaughtering meat?
Well, there was definitely meat down there.
Yeah.
So, and we've also come across some other things other than just this really wonderful ceramic vessel. Come across a lot of 1930s era beer cans too. Yeah, I'll probably produce one of those a little bit later.
So I will say that was one of the inspirations around the smoked meat was taking a look at the fact that this was a Piggly Wiggly. We were coming up with all different kinds of names and stuff with it. And so as we started looking through the history and realized that it was that theme, I really wanted to call it something with the pig, but we ended up settling on smoked. But it's nice to be able to still to tie that back in. And now we're really starting to look at it. You know, what real smoked meat is you really shouldn't have to have a barbecue sauce to it. It ought to be, the taste ought to be based on the kinds of meat. So my son is anticipating right now maybe raising his own hogs, and he's actually getting ready to buy 45 acres of land out in the country so that we can bring this as a farm to table.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And bring that good meat that's raised right here in South Carolina.
Well, I think it's probably safe to say that one of the beers that won't be on tap or in a can downstairs will be Blatz. But I want to just read this. This is from probably about 1940 beer can, and it is built very differently than the cans that you would run into today. It says, this can is especially designed to protect Blatz at the peak of perfection, to guard the quality and scientific blend that have made Blatz America's good taste favorite. Requires little space, stacks well in refrigerator, safe and sanitary. Drink it if you will. Light cannot penetrate, cools quickly, no deposit required, no empties to return. And it was not returned, it was stuck in one of the walls here, I believe, that Nashville discovered. So why don't we make our way upstairs? We'll see a lot more. Love the different textures here. What you see on different wallpapers that were here during the various uses of the property. So beautiful tonight. So, Scott, we're just going to kind of let people know that there is the entrance here, which used to be Uptown Taylor's, and this is the smaller of the two areas. Okay, and so what we're looking at here is the 1645 address. Again, this is half of the historic structure that would have been known as Bryce's Corner or Bryce's Range for Robert Bryce, who was a grocer. He ultimately ran his business out of what is now Hendricks and rented the other side here, so 1645. But access to that upstairs was made through a central doorway. That central doorway is a little bit narrower than what we're going to go through in just a moment. But bear in mind, these two structures would have been roughly the same design physically, okay? What is interesting, and this is something we're trying to verify, what is interesting is that we know that by mid-summer, July of 1866, that the Erhlich building was ready. It was completed. We know by September that there were occupants in it other than the Erhlichs, okay? The Bryce range, as it came to be called in the Columbia Daily Phoenix, may well be antebellum, and it may have been a reconditioned antebellum structure that was damaged during the fire in February of 1865. We're not sure, but there's something that's very interesting. The Daily Phoenix says September of 1865 that this building, or at least a building that was on this property, was reshingled, and that there were brick offices available to be rented. And so if you think about it, in this range, you would have had a store, and then potentially offices upstairs. It also goes to say that the offices could be used as stores. Why would you reshingle potentially a new building? Probably wouldn't do that. And then B.F. Williams, in his memoirs and history of Columbia from the 1920s, recalls that Bryce was someone who rebuilt. Didn't say he built new necessarily, but he could have reconditioned an existing structure. So we're kind of wrestling with that. Potentially, this might be an earlier building than the one immediately to its south. So not sure,
And
but
would it be the oldest building standing on Main Street?
yeah, they might be. Well, let's make our way upstairs and see.
John, while y'all are making your way upstairs, we have a couple of questions.
Might have to give us a second, Megan.
Okay.
Chandler, while we're going here, I just want to point out this wonderful Greek keying that you see in the floor. And this was part of that tile that was put in place in the 1920s after the fire that the Erhlich store experienced in 1928.
Chandler, can you tell John the questions? Is that the way this is going to need to work?
Sorry, yeah, that's what I was just doing.
Okay, so one of the
Also
questions
thank
is,
Mashburn for wonderfully illuminating this space. Very thankful for that.
Megan's going to ask you a question.
Okay.
Too, I believe.
Megan, you've got some questions.
yeah, we have a few questions from the group. One is, that's a local beer, and I just did a quick Google search. It looks like it is out of Milwaukee, so no, it was not a local beer.
Latz was not local.
Another question we got is, what is the estimated combined square footage of this project?
I'm going to turn that over to Andrew or maybe Jay. Andrew, do you recall?
I should know that.
Brian?
Fit right at 15,000 square feet. We thought at one point it was going to be somewhere like in 13, and that's what I was budgeting for. And then every time I turned around, the price of this building was going higher and higher. And then somebody came back and said, no, we measured it. It was right at 15,000 square feet.
That's the interior.
That's the
There's a lot
interior.
more out
Yeah,
there.
there's, yeah.
The wonderful opportunity kept expanding.
Well,
is what you're saying.
exactly. So yeah, this whole building really did it did increase, and of course there was just so much wrong with the building. I'm sometimes wondering how it stayed standing, but so we've had to put a lot of dollars into this thing.
I was talking a little bit with Brian earlier about how these buildings kind of came to be structural. And if I can find it, Brian, you have a lap joint over here.
Yep.
You can point that out. Chandler, can you zoom in on that? It's to the left of the transom. You got a lap joint, and if you'll notice, there's a little peg that's sticking out of that lap joint. You see some mortise and tenon construction there. So hole and peg construction, not necessarily needing any kind of nails or anything like that. We often talk about, is this historic structure haunted? Are there ghosts? Well, there are plenty of ghosts in this space, not necessarily spirits. But if you look through all of the structural timbers, you'll see these little white lines. and those correspond to the plaster and the lath. So the lath would be the dark spots that the plaster did not touch. And then you have, of course, the white spots where the plaster keyed into the lath that is the matrix on which that finished product would adhere. You get a lot of great details, one of which, and I'm going to let Janie come over and show that to everybody. It ties in nicely, I think, to the family that built the building.
Yeah, so when we first came upon the upstairs, this was all plaster. So as we start kind of, again, chipping away at the layers, we came across this mural. What is it? It's a boot. The Erhlichs were boot and shoemakers. So while they were living up here, likely between 1866 and I think 1880 is when the Erhlich home on Blanding Street was constructed. So they likely, lived upstairs, worked downstairs, and maybe they were practicing their sign making for advertisements. You can actually see, let's see, I have a little image here that shows kind of the exact same thing. So very interesting find when we uncovered the historic plaster. So again, it just shows that, we thought the plaster was original to the building. Well, original to the building can mean a lot of different things because there's so many different layers and areas of significance. So this is actually original with a capital O here. And then the plaster, and then this very decorative ornamental overmantel and fireplace would have also come later.
So yeah, it brings a good point. So as Jane pointed out, you've got this really nice silhouette of a boot that corresponds well with the type of graphics that you would have seen, particularly in the newspaper advertisement that Jane shared. But just looking at this wall, you've got a lot going on. You have two original windows that have been, enclosed. We don't have the glass or the sashes right now. Those will be replicated, historically appropriate. But clearly something's going on here, and this horizontal window was added later. You can tell that it's not as refined. Just kind of take a look at the trim work and whatnot. When this building would have been new in the 1860s, most or many of Columbia's newer buildings would have been burning coal and not wood in the fireplaces. Okay, so while you have the oval cast iron surround here in the shallow fireplace, that would have been appropriate for the period. You do have encaustic tile, the yellow tile that's sticking out here, that may have been most likely a little later addition. If I had a little bit of water, I'd probably wet this for you, but the bricks that you see here, or the tile rather, the encaustic tile there, very similar to the tile that you would have found, or you still can find in the Woodrow Wilson home, former Woodrow Wilson home, now the Museum of Reconstruction. But the overmantel, mantel surround, and the mirror that you see here with the gallery on top, all of that is much later. That's going to be 1890s. It's more Edwardian style. Theoretically, you kind of push into the 1880s. And if that's the case, then theoretically, it could have been perhaps brought here roughly when the family was having their home built on Blanding Street. One of the key features of this room, which is of course going to be the kitchen, are these wonderful pocket doors. This will give you an idea as to just the size, not only the size of the doors, but also how they go into the wall here like that, and there's a gap, and then you've got your rail up there. This is something that I believe might be in someone's home just a couple doors down. Am I right? I think that you may have had these in yours, if I'm not mistaken, Scott.
The pocket doors?
Yeah, pocket doors. Did you not? I thought you did. Maybe I'm mistaken.
No,
Maybe I'm thinking of another.
We added pocket doors.
Oh, you added pocket. Oh, now you got it.
Yeah, yeah, that was very intriguing to me. Yeah, so
it was on our last behind the scenes tour, so I apologize for those of you who joined us last time. You saw a pocket door. So
yeah.
Free association.
But this is probably what made me fall in love with this whole apartment.
Right.
Yeah. One other thing I'd like to point out too, before we just kind of open up the floor for further questions, is something that has been kind of puzzling me. I hope we can see it. All right. Chandler, is there any way you can zoom in on top of this?
I don't know if I'm that
wall?
tall, but I'll try.
Let's see. You can zoom in just a little bit, pull it back. There is some kind of stencil going ghosting on the 3 or 4 horizontal boards at the top of this wall. I'm not really sure exactly what that's from. We haven't been able to find it on anything else in the rooms. Brian, kind of bouncing it back to you real quick. Sure. There's obviously a lot of new construction here, stud work. Tell us about how it is mating up nominal wood well with historic.
Yeah, well, so there is a little bit of finagling that you have to do with the new dress dimensional lumber versus the old. So, you know, an old 2x4 is actually more 2x4 versus a new, which is 1.5 inches by 3.5. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but probably the neatest thing whenever you bring up the new and the old up here, when you look at this space, you can look through and you can see the little bits and pieces that we've added on, but most of all this space, I think really all of this space are original walls. So being able to come in here again and visualize, you know, the program that the owner wanted in here and figuring out how to fit it in the space and actually save every single wall in here. So yeah, we may have added on a few studs to make a door opening, but that's the original wall. So this is pretty much the original layout of this apartment. So, you know, here in 2021, we're going to have, you know, somebody coming in here and living in this space again with all the modern amenities and, you know, glass shower door and all that, but the walls are going to be exactly like they were back in 1800. So it's pretty cool, but you make a good point. That is a challenge whenever you try to come back and dress to an old stud. A little bit of shimming, a little bit of furring, that sort of thing. So and it's also interesting, you know, how the difference in the plates whenever you got, you know, true 4x4 plates or studs. In some areas, studs go up and they don't have top plates. They support right to the rafters. So it was a lot more, I guess I'll say a lot more craftsmanship, not to, you know, talk bad about folks nowadays, but there was a lot more work that, you know, that was put into some of this, the way they construct things.
Okay. Speaking about the artisanry in this, from a design perspective, if you had to crawl into Gustavus Theodor Berg's brain, it's 1865, and the Erhlich say we want a building, and we want these design features. What in this process, perhaps Andrew, gave you any kind of insight into what it was like to be in the driver's seat during the Reconstruction era, designing buildings or drafting buildings?
Yeah, that's what's it's incredible to see. You know, it's with these historic buildings, you always uncover these unique aspects around every turn, and it's always kind of a game of reacting to those along the way and having a good construction team, a good owner that understand how those tweaks need to be made along the way. And Mashburn's done a great job of retaining so many of those features. We've already seen the pocket doors, the fireplaces that are going to be refurbished, working with the basic layout. And like Brian said, using something from the 1800s and making it still useful today is just such a challenge, but also this opportunity to really make great use of the existing space that we have, down to, you'll notice the baseboards, the door frames, the openings that all can be retained, and these great transoms above the doors. These are all just amazing features that, you know, that were thought up over 100, 150 years ago almost, and now we're still making use of those, which is really exciting to be able to do. So just, you know, it's great to be a part of a process like this.
So for 25 years, John and Matilda Friday lived up here. And there were, after he passed away and she moved to Laurel Street to be with her niece, there were a host of other uses and other people. Janie, could you just kind of give us a staccato of folks you remember perhaps, and then we'll finish it up with Scott on that.
There was an optometrist, which in the 1908 historic photograph showing the storefront design, you can see on the, I believe it's the far left-hand side between 1639 and 1643. I think his name was Dr. Robbins. He was up here. There was a doorway right over there. That was Dr. Hall, dentist. Oh gosh, those are the two that are sticking out off the top of my head. But there were, let's see if we can walk over this way. You can see how there were little corner corner sinks where it was kind of used as a boarding house. So these rooms were very small, portioned off. You can see, yeah, again, John was talking about ghosts. Here was a little porcelain sink in the corner. So there were lots of different people living and working up here. Next door was a seamstress for a while. Even more recently, it was a seamstress tailor's office. So there's been kind of a lot of replaying of what was historically here, kind of coming back time and time again.
All right, well, I think we probably can wrap it up with parting shot from Scott, and then we're going to open it up to any more questions. Megan, if there are questions, let us know.
We do have some questions.
Everybody's enjoyed themselves.
You want to hit us with one, Megan?
Sure. People are very, very curious about the boot.
About the boots.
Will it go?
Oof, I can't speak to that. I would hope that it might be encapsulated again. If you just kind of wall over it and know that it's there. Because for me, at least, I'm not the owner, but I think that would be kind of neat to be able to know it was there.
Well, you know, originally we thought everything had to go back plaster, but after what you just told me that originally it
That's
was,
a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good
So
point.
can we get approval
That might
that
be.
we don't have to do the plaster?
Well, at least
there?
not in that
So-
area. So that's a
Yeah.
great point.
So, you know, it's always fun when you walk in these buildings and you see this exposed brick. And so actually my daughter talked about doing like wallpaper that looked like brick just because it was pretty. But from a historical perspective, we're trying to be true to that. And of course, to get our tax credits, we have to be. And so I guess as we uncover more and more things, maybe there's some changes to it. But that's the other thing you have to realize when you're doing these projects is, one, you can't count on that you can establish a budget and go with it. But I also like to explain to people that if it wasn't for the tax credits, actually, I went down and spoke not recently to the Senate subcommittee because they were having to reapprove to do the state and abandoned tax credit bill. And I think there was a lot of folks that just didn't really understand it because some of the senators were going, well, I don't really see this in my area, but so why are we always given this money? But this building, I think, at the end of the day, we have over $600 a square foot in this building, and that was with the building already here. So when you start thinking about, I could have tore this building down and rebuilt it for less money than that. But to be true to it, then no developer would actually go in and do something like that if it wasn't for those tax credits that are available. So it's very appreciative.
And that's a great point, Scott. The empowerment one receives from tax credits has truly been integral in transforming not just Columbia, particularly in the 1600 block, but also other areas throughout our state. Here locally, Historic Columbia maintains easements on a lot of those buildings, including this one. So that's part of our portfolio. And Historic Columbia, as a preservation advocate, as a partner with folks like Rogers Lewis and Scott and other owners, partners with construction companies and architects like Garvin Design Group, we're able to help kind of mold what the future will look like through the retention of historic structures. So quite frankly, if y'all haven't had fun tonight, y'all just trust me, this is a lot of fun. I think everybody's probably had fun getting into the bones of a project like this, getting a chance to see all of the facets here in kind of real time is an amazing, amazing thing. We're glad that you were able to join us. I hope you have some questions, and we'll round out the evening with the answers, hopefully.
Yeah, we've got a few more. We want to know if there will be elevators in the building.
Absolutely. There was a lot of discussion about that, but this apartment, once it's finished, is really $1 million apartment. And so it'll be high-end finishes and extremely nice. And somebody's not going to walk in and either rent or buy $1 million apartment if they have to walk up a set of flights of stairs. And so that became a real big issue. So yes, there was an elevator out back. That was the new shaft that you saw that was built out there. And we actually were able to incorporate around that space that will be some entertainment space that will be available for the downstairs back courtyard. But also we're adding another outdoor space that's going out over 1645 that will be a private balcony space for the owners of this space up here.
Next question. Thank you,
Thanks,
Scott.
Scott. I think you mentioned a rooftop in the back part, but what's the plan for rooftop spaces?
Yeah, so the rooftop spaces, there'll be just one small space that's right next to the elevator that will be on those the steel beams and stuff that you saw. That will be able to probably seat about 15 or 20 people that will overlook the courtyard. But the other private spaces on 1645 will be private just for the residents of the apartments up here.
Thank you. Okay, that's all the questions that I have in the chat right now. If anybody has any final questions, please ask them. And I just want to take a moment to thank our project partners. Tonight's event could not have come together without Lindsay Cully at Mashburn and Meg Southern with Garvin and Charlotte Knoop and the whole LTC team. So thank you, Greg and Scott, for all that your team, Joe, and everybody put together to help us get tonight's event teed up. We are so appreciative of all of your support of Historic Columbia. And many of you on the call tonight are members, so thank you for that. If you're not and you're interested, let us know. We'd be happy to talk to you about getting in the Historic Columbia family, whether that's through a corporate membership or personal. And we will continue to do this series virtually as long as that's the way of the world, but look forward to getting back in person really soon. And I think, Scott, I can't believe no one asked this, so I'm just going to put you on the spot and say, when's it opening?
So, yeah, actually, Brian probably could tell closer, but my date is they're going to be ready to walk out of here around the middle of August. You know, it changes, depends on how much rain there is. And then as soon as they walk out, I like to open. So we'll probably be open, I would say, between the early and mid-September.
And I was joking a couple of weeks ago. I said, it'll be during football season. I didn't qualify which football season. But I personally cannot wait to come here. I'd love to visit the apartment. I think it'd be really cool to see what it looks like, but I can't wait to be downstairs and maybe get a membership to the speakeasy, because that sounds really neat.
Exactly. Yeah.
My favorite part of these projects is sitting back with a cold beverage at the end and cheersing to all the hard work of all of the people involved. So ready for a cocktail downstairs when it's all ready.
Well, Megan, thank you for making sure everything went smoothly. And thank you, Chandler, for bringing all of the wonderful evening to everyone's computer or their cell phone. Folks, we're really, really appreciative of your attending this event tonight, albeit virtually. We do look forward to hosting more in person when things calm down. Until then, good health. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Chandler, can we get a thumbs up? I appreciate your behind the scenes.
My bad. I didn't mean to leave you hanging there. Absolutely. Yeah.
And Janie, thank you too. All right, y'all, we're going to sign out.
All right. Y'all take care.